morning and good afternoon to everyone joining us for this insightful webinar. I am Fernando Anaya, a senior consultant at United Nations Environment Program. Today it's my privilege to welcome you on these sessions on trends in global vehicle fleet 2023 and its implications for Latin American minerals. Our discussion today is not only pivotal, but also very timely, especially in the context of the kickoff of the COP28. As the world eyes are on climate negotiations and sustainable initiatives, our focus on evolving global electric market, its energy efficiency, and the shift towards electric vehicles is more relevant than ever. These developments have significant implications, particularly for the region of Latin American and the Caribbean countries, placing them at a strategic point in the global value chain. I'm delighted to introduce our invited expert, Pierpaolo Cazzola. Pierpaolo is the director of the European Transport and Energy Research Center at the Institute of Transportation Studies at the University of California, Davis, and a global research fellow at Columbia University's School of International and Public Affairs. With over 2 decades of experience at the intersection of transport, energy, and environmental sustainability, his insights today will be extremely valuable for policymakers. Pierpaolo has a master's degree in energy economics from the Institut Français of Petrol and Energies Nouvelles, excuse my French, master's in aerospace engineering from Politecnico di Torino, excuse my Italian, and bachelor's of engineering in aeronautics from the University of Glasgow. Today, Pierpaolo will guide us through the dynamic changes in the in the vehicle market, the rise of electric vehicle sales, and the implications on the energy efficiency. We'll also explore potential collaborative avenues between the Latin American countries and the European Union, particularly on the European Union's Global Getaway Initiative. Our schedule today will begin with a presentation by Pierpaolo, followed by a Q&A session. And we encourage you to participate and look forward for a fruitful exchange of ideas. And now, without further ado, I'm pleased to hand over to Pierpaolo Cazzola.
Thank you very much. So thanks for the invitation to speak. It's a pleasure. So I'm going to talk today about trends in the global vehicle fleet and what are the implications of what is happening for Latin America. I'm going to draw on different pieces of research that have been published recently. One is an update on the vehicle market trend analysis that came out just a few days ago. It was developed by the UC Davis and the FIA Foundation. The second one is a commentary that we developed at the Center on Global Energy Policy that also fed into a paper by CAF on the joint EU Latin American agenda for development. And the third one is a piece that we published in May on the facilitation of a transition to zero-emission vehicles in the global south. So the three are relevant for what we're talking about today. I'll start with an overview of what happened in the car market over the course of the past few years. So here you see a series of data covering the whole world and with a focus on cars, with millions of sales. So what this shows is that there's been a growth between 2005 and 2017-18 in the number of vehicles sold, but then also a slowdown in the following years, partly due to COVID and partly due to difficulties in rebounding sales post-COVID, post-2020. So 2021 and 2022 were not very much higher than what we've seen in 2020 in terms of overall car sales. At the same time, we have seen a transition in powertrain, in the type of equipment, basically the way the vehicles are driven, are powered, towards a greater relevance of I would say, in particular, electric vehicles or electrified vehicles, so basically hybrids and plug-in hybrids and battery electric vehicles. The The rate of increase has been more pronounced in very recent years, in particular 2021 and 2022. So this is where there's been transformative implications related with this. I will get into that in a second. Here you have the same type of representation where the different areas of the world are represented separately. And this shows that the phenomenon of increased electrification is not a universal phenomenon and has been something as being more focused in certain regions of the world, namely China, Europe, North America, Korea, to some extent Japan, but there's then a very limited penetration in other parts of the world. So what you see on the bottom right in terms of other countries. That's one of the problems we want to talk about. Looking specifically at EVs and the way they came into the market and in which market segments. So this slide shows just zooms on the electric vehicles and plug-in hybrids and where they've been rolled out. So the overall amount of electric vehicles exceeded 10 millions in terms of stock in 2022. And what you see also is that there is a distribution. So this is for cars, top left. And then on the right, you see pie charts that show the different situation in terms of market shares for different vehicle types. And that indicates that electric vehicles by now are almost half of the two-wheelers, mostly located in China. They are almost a quarter of buses, and in terms of sales, and they have a growing share in cars and not yet in trucks. Yeah, sorry, 10 millions are sales, not stock. In terms of developments of the global vehicle market, the car market, there has also been another trend which is important and shown here in red. And it's a shift towards larger and heavier vehicles. This is a shift that has been characterizing, let's say, this is the results on screen are for the total of the whole world. One important point of information is that this has been leading to increased energy use compared to a situation where without a shift. I'll get into more details on this soon. As in the case of electrification, when we look at different regions of the world, things are not the same. SUVs, so large cars, tend to be have highest shares in North America, especially the very large ones. There are other regions where there has been, like generally speaking, the growth has been observed everywhere, but the other parts of the world with a significant share of SUVs include China, Europe, and Korea, to a lower extent Japan, and India, bottom right. India being Japan and India being amongst the countries globally that have the largest share of actually smaller vehicles. For reasons that relate in part to fuel taxation regimes, in parts to density, in part to the fact that countries are not in the same position with respect to their own domestic supply of fossil fuels, which have been a strong influencer of the way fuel taxation has been developing, and also the vehicle mix has been developing in the past. The implications for this on energy consumption are shown here on screen. Here are liters of gasoline equivalent per 100 kilometers. So a classical, let's say, unit for combustion vehicles. You see different countries in different colors. What is indicated here is that there's been an improvement which was fairly significant before 2010, and then a tendency to flatten between 2010 and 2020, and then again a renewed improvement in the more recent year, 2021 and 2022. And what we observe is that the stronger improvement in the very recent year is correlated with the fact that there has been a significant growth in electric vehicles sales and penetration in the market. So that electric vehicles come with much better fuel economy, and that has major implications in terms of what is the average fuel economy of the whole fleets in different parts of all the new sales, or in different parts of the world. Of course, the regions that have seen stronger penetration of EVs are those that see a stronger decline in terms of energy use per kilometer. That's important because this means that EVs can be a strong driver of energy efficiency improvements, and have actually led to a very strong doubling of the improvements that we have seen between 2005 2000 and 2019 when we look at the period post 2019. This is the same graph showing the trends in terms of CO2 emissions. So the difference being that battery electric vehicles have zero tailpipe emissions, zero direct emissions. So this only looks at the direct emissions, and inevitably the trend towards an improvement is even stronger in the case of CO2 because precisely of the fact that there's no like residual amount. You're adding zeros when doing a weighted average in a given geography. So, in short, the global vehicle market is changing structurally. There is a tendency to move towards larger vehicles and also a shift in the powertrains. The shift has been stronger for two-wheelers and buses than it has been for cars. Trucks are not yet there, but I personally expect them to be next in line, even if there are challenges related with the charging infrastructure needed for that. All these changes have significant implications if one looks at them from an energy efficiency perspective, but also from a CO2 emission perspective. I've shown you that trends have been changing precisely because of powertrain shift, but also they were flattening before because of the SUV increase in terms of market shares. And also, we don't see the same developments across all regions. There are still imbalances across different regions. EVs are growing the most in China and in Europe, now more recently also in Korea and North America, and less so in other parts of the world. And so that's something that I think needs a fix, and policy fix. When it comes to why, what is the status? What is how has this shift to electric vehicles happened? And so here you see a graph that is from the report we published in May, that shows the status of policies with a color coding on in different countries of the world. We try to cover, let's say, the G20, the P20, so the 20 largest countries in terms of GDP and in terms of population, plus all other selected examples. And so that's what you see on screen. And we also try to look at different policy deployment. So we qualify the policy framework in different parts of the world, and also we consider different market sizes. And so what is observed here is that there is a subset of 8 countries or global regions with a comprehensive EV deployment policies. So these are Canada, China, the EU, India, Korea, Japan, the US, and the UK. And except for India, which is still in a situation where the let's say the kink in terms of market penetration of electric vehicles has not yet entirely happened. These are countries that also, so the countries with the strongest policies in place are also those that have seen the strongest growth in terms of EV market shares. Other economies that are somewhere, let's say, following include Mexico, Thailand, Chile, Colombia, Indonesia. So some in Latin America, others, some in the Western Balkans and in Central Asia. Most of the countries that have an EV in high EV penetration at the moment are high income countries, and many of those that have strong policies in place are countries that produce vehicles, that essentially see a threat from the transition to electric mobility and have been proactive in trying to support the technology transition, also from an industrial development perspective. Here, there's another graph, which I think is important to show, again, from the same report that came out in May, and shows the situation when it comes to policies related with the EV battery supply chain and its sustainable, and making sure that it is sustainable. So in this case, the picture is gloomier. I would say less countries have been taking action to ensure that we can align sustainability requirements with the development of an EV battery value chain. The EU is probably the case with the strongest policy framework. Other places have been also adopting interesting policies, mainly, I would say, what we see in terms of most progressive policies are in the EU, in the US, in some other selected countries, including China. But generally speaking, you see much more red here than in the earlier graph, showing that there is a greater gap in terms of policy making requiring catching up. And this is important because making sure that the end of life and the mineral extraction is aligned with sustainability requirement will be necessary to ensure that EVs come without disruptive impacts, environmental impacts. So that's an area of that needs improvement. And so on the policy side, what we see is an uneven market development, which reflects different policies and different ways to stimulate change. Generally speaking, the countries with the strongest action are high income. They include large markets and have a sizable automotive industry domestically. Some of these are in Latin America, but I would say Latin America is a case where I wouldn't define the policy developments in the region as something that has been homogeneous. I think is rather heterogeneous. There are greater policy gaps in terms of aligning EVs with sustainable value chains for the battery manufacturing and end-of-life handling. The implication of these for Latin America are relevant because we see a very dynamic development in the market and in terms of policy in major regions of demand for vehicles and energy. These will have repercussions on the way industry develops, and in the automotive industry, energy industry, and mining industries. And Latin American countries are often rich in EV battery materials. Some of them are also automotive countries themselves, and so they have domestic production capacity. And so these will have important implications on their own socioeconomic development. At least that's our expectation. So this is not something that is irrelevant for Latin America. It will have an impact. We also see a number of areas where we think there are significant opportunities for collaboration between the EU and Latin America. So this is extracted from the piece that I mentioned earlier that was published for CAF and also went on the Columbia University website. So we also published this in a series of commentaries there and blog posts. The key points here is that we see Latin American countries in a situation where they need to find opportunities to leapfrog towards electric vehicles. This is true in terms of technology adoption and contribution to, decarbonization, but also, let's say, an alignment of their own industrial development with what the rest of the world is witnessing. We also think it's important for Latin American countries to find opportunities to participate in the global value chain. We see important investments happening in terms of converting plants, automotive industry plants, also installing battery capacity production in Europe. And we think that there could be synergies when looking at the EU and Latin America in terms of what could happen, given that the number of manufacturers located in Latin America are headquartered in the EU. Examples are Volkswagen, Renault, and Stellantis. We also see significant attempts with the 300 billion of investments attached to the EU Global Gateway, which is meant to facilitate the transition, including the industrial transition in other parts of the world, in a way that is basically promoting win-win solution for the other part of the world and the EU itself, and access to low-carbon energy. We think Latin America could be a key role in this space as a supplier of raw materials, but also basically benefiting from investments in terms of technology transitions. And we think there's scope for cooperation between the EU and Latin America. on one hand to facilitate a supply of critical mineral to Europe, and on the other hand also to ensure that there's a greater access, better access to investments and technologies in Latin America. Then there is a risk, which is the fact that this could come with an asymmetrical division of labor between EU and Latin America. So that's something that we think should be avoided. And it's important, therefore, to think about in a way to respond to this and seize opportunities, to think about this in a way that does not continue this asymmetrical division of labor and enables win-win solution, as I mentioned earlier. So this could help provide opportunities, investments could help provide opportunities to industrialize key sectors in a way that is aligned with the requirement, let's say, of a transition towards a net zero environment, and leveraging the potential that exists in the country, which is very significant, and enabling to do that with capital available from Europe, in the case of an EU and Latin America collaboration. There are definitely opportunities to attract investment for material processing, manufacturing of finished or semi-finished products. This includes batteries for electric vehicles, and so therefore to ensure that there is a transition to become a key part of the global value chain for Latin America. And a key advantage of the EU is its leadership in terms of policy developments, which was also shown in the tables with the color coding I showed before, especially when it comes to the topic of sustainable battery value chain, which I personally see as a key asset, because the more you manage to align with the sustainable value chain, I think the greater will be the opportunities for growth in a way that is compatible with the UN Sustainable Development Goal and the use of sustainability as a driver for socioeconomic development, which is clearly the direction that has been taken by the European Union with the Green Deal since a few years. Voila, I think this is giving you, well, this was my overview. Here you have my emails in case you want to send me a message or you have any questions, and I would be, of course, happy to take questions and discuss.
Thank you so much, Pier Paolo, for such a comprehensive presentation. I do have a couple of questions either received from people in the chat or from myself. On the policy side that you were exploring or like describing, you mentioned that Latin American countries have the opportunity to leapfrog on the EVs, or at least they have to find those opportunities, those avenues. I wonder, are there any low-hanging fruits or fast-track actions that countries can start working in the short term to get or to identify or start working already in these leapfrogging actions to increase EV participation?
Do you mean in the region? In
Correct.
Latin America?
The Latin American region, based on the experience you have seen in Europe.
Yes. So my understanding is that there are some excellent examples in terms of good practices. Some of them are focused on the transition of the bus fleet. So there are very good examples, for example, in Chile there. Latin American countries have a key role in terms of the extractive sector as well, Chile being another example, seeing major opportunities for its own development by leveraging the availability of large amounts of minerals that would be relevant for the EV battery value chain. There is the case of Mexico as well, which is a strong automotive country and has been attracting investments in terms of EV manufacturing. I think, though, I'm not. Costa Rica is another example that has been ahead of the pack in terms of embracing the transition of e-mobility towards e-mobility. So I think that there are examples in the region that can be inspirational for others. There is a greater potential, in my opinion, to respond to the challenge in a way that is more cohesive and coherent, creating an opportunity in terms of scale that is larger and therefore more capable to attract investments in the region. So that's something that I think we're not yet there, and it would be nice. I mean, it would be important to seize opportunities to go in that direction.
Absolutely. And based on the data you have analyzed and the pandemic, that it was very disruptive in so many levels in different markets. I wonder in what ways the COVID pandemic altered the long-term trends in the global vehicle market, particularly in terms of the vehicle types and consumer preferences.
Yeah, I think that some of the effects we have seen of a longer, they're part of a longer trend. So the transition towards larger vehicles is something that started a decade before COVID and has been continuing throughout. It's a combination of, let's say, an interest to make more money from the sales of cars, because SUVs tend to be more expensive, and if they don't transition in terms of powertrain, they lead to larger margins. It's also changing consumer preference. I think the two are somehow linked to each other. Consumer preference change easier if you get greater offer, let's say, of products in a given market segment. So there is this longer term effect. I think the rise of EVs is also something that was already visible in the second half of the 2010 rather clearly. I wrote about this quite a bit while at the IEA with the Global EV Outlook. So these are trends that, let's say, pre-existed, that occurred before COVID. COVID led to supply chain disruptions, not just in the automotive sector, in particular with the semiconductors, which were needed to for vehicle production. So this led to some degree of a number of challenges in terms of making sure that vehicles could be produced and sold. And this is what explains, alongside the contraction of the economy during COVID, despite the let's say the recovery packages and rescue packages enacted by the governments. So this is what explains the constraints that we have seen after 2020, and yeah, what we have observed is that so far these have been, so up to 2022, there has not been a strong recovery in terms of the global vehicle market. So that's in a nutshell, I think, the summary of what we saw and showed in the first slides too.
Right, right. Yes, and I want to jump back into what you mentioned on the creation of sustainable value chain in the mineral supply. And the question is, how can the EU expertise in sustainable battery value chain and local EV demand can be leveraged to benefit both regions and aligning with the global climate goals and promoting sustainable economic growth?
Yes. So I think what is happening in Europe is that we have now the battery regulation, which defines the way electric vehicle batteries should look like, let's say, and the extent to which they should ensure that they provide transparency in terms of the type of materials that they use, and the extent to which they rely on recycled materials or not, the traceability of the different minerals and processing phases used to produce batteries that equip European electric vehicles. And so this anticipates, I think, a number of other moves that will happen elsewhere, and provides a clear framework in terms of ensuring, like, defining what are the key criteria to meet sustainability requirements. So it's going to be important to work closely with European partners to ensure. So Europe will also move more towards the domestic production of batteries because it's something for which it has been lagging behind, and there's a strong interest in pushing for the development of that industry. To some extent, the sustainability criteria are a way for Europe to differentiate its own battery value chain from the rest of the world. And a key asset of a key opportunity for Latin American countries is like what we wrote also in this piece for the for CGEP, for the Center on Global Energy Policy, is the alignment of let's say the way the fact that we're talking essentially about democratic countries, and we're talking about market economies. So there is a possibility to leverage this opportunity to bring investments. So there is, on the top of it, coming with very significant mineral endowment. So I think there are clear opportunities like to get the guidance from the European policy framework on sustainability, to mobilize investments, and to ensure that the development towards electric vehicles become an economic opportunity for countries in Latin America to leverage the potential they have in terms of mineral endowment. And there are also opportunities to maintain part of the supply chain in Latin America, and so essentially ensure that this is not just about the extractive industry, but it's more than that. And as I say, there are big links that already exist between industries producing in Latin America and automotive industry in Europe, for example. So this means also a high level of understanding of what is the policy development that has been taking place in Europe, and which I think provides a competitive advantage in order to respond to those policy signals. The fact that there is this strong connection between the European automotive industry and Latin American one, I think, is an advantage in that respect.
And since you're mentioning some examples, and in the context of the sustainable development goals, I wonder how the countries can integrate gender view on possible value change in the Latin American region for mineral supply. How countries can integrate the gender view, reducing inequalities, gender inequalities, when developing this new value change, mineral value change?
Gender.
Yes.
That's a question.
I mean, whether you have any examples on
I don't have
European
specific examples
region.
on gender, but yeah, gender is, let's say, part of the idea of ensuring sustainability includes equality, which includes a gender dimension. I think the response to that depends on specific choices by the government, by the companies, and in terms of the workforce they employ, the opportunities they offer, the equal opportunity they offer, no matter the gender of people employed. So I don't think there are strong drivers in the European sustainability framework when it comes to like the battery regulation, which are specifically linked to the gender dimension. I may be wrong on that. But I think there is a broad understanding and agreement that like the gender element is one of those that would contribute to alignment in terms of what we want and what this SDGs define. So I don't, I can't, I can't answer in terms of what are the specific policy drivers related with gender on the battery value chain from the European policy framework. I haven't been focusing on that, so I don't want to
Understood. Understood.
create like over
Understood.
expectations on what that can actually help achieving. I think the challenge is
Absolutely. And
important, needs to be taken
it's an
seriously.
ongoing work at the
Mm.
end of the day too, right? And when you see the region, the Latin American region, and their like existing value chains, minerals value chains, what do you see is needed to be in place right now to strengthening their capacity and tapping the benefits of minerals supply to Europe from the Latin American region? What will be the readiness the countries have to be working right away to be ready at the time where this increased demand for minerals, critical minerals, will be in there, and the region needs to be ready for that.
Well, I think we are already there. We are in a phase where we're going to witness an increased demand for critical minerals. Now it's a matter of uh, developing investments and making sure that we have a supply response to the growth in demand for minerals. I think I think the fact that we will have a growth in demand is beyond any doubt. The risk is that the way the supply will respond will struggle to align with good practices in terms of uh, let's say respecting sustainability requirements. So the fact that there is a strong sustainability related framework in place in Europe can help steer investments towards ways to develop the extractive industry in line with the better practices there. The risk is that if this does not happen, is that the standard of, I mean, I think the demand will remain in place. The standard that will be used in terms of developing this industry will not be aligned with those sustainability requirements, and will end up delivering worse outcomes for the benefit of the countries that have like large mineral availability. So in my view, there is an opportunity to embrace directly the more sustainable way to develop an extractive industry, because it will end up being beneficial for the countries that are host the location of those extractive industries, and also will enable greater opportunities to retain additional value from the transformation of those primary minerals. So yeah, I think we are now at a phase where there are choices to be made, and I would rather choose to go for let's say the more virtuous way to embrace the transition that ensures greater local benefits for countries where with extractive activities than not. So, and I think we have that opportunity from these ambitious regulatory framework, especially in Europe right now.
Yes, and it's interesting. You also mentioned win-win solutions and virtuous alliances between the regions. What do you think it will be like the areas where the countries can explore or further explore that are already in place, like probably capacity building or knowledge exchange or investment? What would be those situations where countries can further explore these win-win alliances or
One
solutions?
one obvious examples that comes to mind is that if you have the same, let's say, global company uh, producing vehicles in Latin America and in Europe, there are opportunities from developing technologies and supply chain, essentially ensuring that the characteristics of the parts supplied work well for both markets. There could be advantages in terms of scale. There are advantages in terms of the fact that decisions can be taken in a way that is coordinated, and that can enable investments that have access to a broader market base in terms of potential clients. Let's say if you produce batteries and these batteries are suitable for vehicles that you produce in Brazil and I don't know, Spain or in France, then your battery production can have access inherently to a broader demand base. So that's something that I think could come with net benefits if there is a capacity to develop a battery, a mineral extraction, mineral transformation, and battery production value chain in Latin America. And the availability of the minerals is clearly offering an interesting advantage, competitive advantage with respect to other parts of the world.
Right. And in that sense, what would be your message to those countries with strong fossil fuels industries and potentials, a big potential for mineral extraction industries for developing their local extractive industries?
I think there will be a growing demand of low carbon technologies, especially when it comes to electrification and what we are talking about here. And I think it's in the interest of even oil producing industry to diversify their industrial base. If this is the case, if we have this growth in demand of electric vehicles in particular, that will come with implication in terms of overall oil demand. So then diversifying the industrial base is something that will ensure that the countries are in a more resilient position in a context where we will see, I think it's going to be likely to see shifts, greater shifts in comparison to what we have seen in the past in terms of the evolution of demand of energy in transport, in particular away from fossil energy. So, my opinion, there is a structural interest, no matter whether you're a producer or not, to seize opportunities in a market that is destined to grow.
Right. Interesting. And I have another question on the market trends, but in this time in Latin America, where we have our own BRICS, country BRICS, like Mexico and Brazil. So do you foresee a situation where these two countries cooperate to attract more investment in vehicle development or in the vehicle industry development and changing their own fleets trends?
Let's say I personally see more advantages from doing that than from not doing that, especially if the rest of the world is going to move in that direction. To a large extent, the car market has been a global market. There has been major efforts to harmonize regulation across the globe, creating specific bubbles with different technology clusters may pay off in the very near term, but I don't think it will pay off in the longer term. So I think it's in the interest of Latin American countries to embrace the the change rather than resist it. It's going to be tough because I think there will be evidently attempts to resist this. But I don't think that's. I think the change we are witnessing is a strong one, with deep implications for the way global markets, the global automotive market, will develop. And losing. So I mean that means a progressive loss of relevance of of the part of the automotive industry that doesn't look into doesn't embrace the e-mobility transition. That's my own perspective, and from what I understand, what I see in terms of data, cost structures, interest, challenges in related with climate change and the need to act for that, policy signals to respond to these challenges, while still enabling economic development, I think everything points towards something that will strengthen the case for e-mobility. Not embarking on that is, I think, is very nearsighted.
Absolutely. And I have one last question for you, Pier Paolo, because we're running out of time. Unfortunately, it's been a very really interesting conversation. And based on the market trends you explored, and do you see that there are any like lessons learned from the EV adoption patterns observed in Asia and Europe that the Latin American countries can adopt to increase their EV participation?
Sorry, can you repeat?
Do you see any lessons learned from EV adoption in Europe and China and Asian countries
Yes.
that can be adopted in Latin America to increase the EV participation in
Oh
their
yes, by
marketplace?
now I think we have interesting signals for government interested in facilitating that transition. We we have seen which policy tools can help there, especially if we're talking about new vehicle registrations. I would say even in some cases for second-hand vehicle imports, which are important for some of the Latin American countries. So the examples are not just from Europe and China. For Europe and China, there are clearly like a set of policies that span from differentiated vehicle taxation to regulatory requirements that, or which are either at the local level or at the national level or even at the supranational level, that have been stimulating the transition towards e-mobility. And alongside attempts by governments to actually seize opportunities for to transform the industrial base. So there's a very broad range of actions that has been taken, and from which there is inspiration that can be drawn. But there are also other cases, and there's one I want to bring up because I think it's extremely important for a continent that has countries that import a lot of vehicles secondhand, and it's the case of New Zealand. So New Zealand has adopted a combination of regulatory requirements and differentiated taxation for vehicles based on the environmental performance, requiring fuel economy improvements, and using a framework that is particularly geared on second-hand imports, because New Zealand imports most of its cars. It's not a producing country. It imports most of its cars from Japan and also from other parts of the world. So it has already developed a policy framework that enables an early transition towards e-mobility for what is going to be the trade in second-hand cars, leveraging the position where it is now, and I think providing something that can be used as a blueprint by other countries that are interested in embracing the change more quickly. I think actually one of the key challenges is how do we help countries with a lower income level to benefit from the transition towards e-mobility early on. So other ideas. So there's a project I've been developing recently in the Balkans where we looked into these. Other ideas, for example, could be a focus on highly utilized vehicles. Highly utilized vehicles already have a business case to go electric, even without subsidies, without differentiated taxation. They are simply a good business case. They require investments, so there's a need for helping having access to investments or to capital at an affordable rate for green investments. But this is something that could happen simply with private sector action, or with inducing, let's say, policies that are provide small incentives. There's an example of like the transition of taxis in Albania, which has been, well, if you go to Albania, lots of taxis in Tirana are actually electric. And that's interesting because the incentive there has not been like a major amount of money poured by the government to actually transition towards those taxis. Has been a regulatory development enabling increased licenses only well attached to environmental requirements, and then private investments did the rest. So it's possible, I think, to facilitate an early transition with a bunch of policies, and there are many places from which one could draw today if it's interested in doing that.
Thank you, Pier Paolo. Just well, quick wrap up. Today's discussion has underscored the pivotal role of Latin American countries in the global shift towards more sustainable vehicle technologies, and the insights you presented about evolving electric market and the vehicle market as a whole, and energy efficiency are without doubt that they are the building blocks for future policies, collaborations, and the identification of new innovations. So as we come to close this session, I would like to extend my deepest gratitude to everyone who joined us from various parts of the world. Your participation, your questions made this webinar very interesting. Special thank you to Pier Paolo for this his enlightening presentation and the depth of the knowledge you shared with us today. And well, thank you again, and for your time, for being in here, and I hope we'll rejoin on a session like this one in the future.
Thank you so much. Also from my side, it was great, and I was honored to be invited to speak here. So it was a great pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye now.